Okay, welcome to the Behaviorism or Behavior Therapies unit. Um, Similar to the psychodynamic one, this is going to have some foundational elements um, that will that have been incorporated into most other systems of therapy, and it's also going to have some modern practice elements. So the unit after this one, the cognitive one, I think will move into more modern um, therapy systems, but those two are important to understand first. So, jumping into behaviorism, um, the basic premise is that behavior is what matters, not anything else, right? So, it's in contrast to maybe some of the sort of more wishy-washy sides of psychology, where you are like, you have these like dreams, or these like subconscious, sort of intrapsychic, forces, right? Like Freud. Behaviorism would say, we don't know that exists, we can't measure it, and we're not going to deal with anything that we can't measure. So that means we're not going to worry about like emotions, thoughts per se, and not directly at least. That what we're going to focus on is behavior, because that's what we can measure. And if this is going to be scientific, we should only work with things that we can prove, that we can measure. And as we'll see, it is possible to measure emotions and thoughts and things like that. You just have to ask the client, right, and trust them, essentially, that they're telling you the truth. Or I guess you can scan their brain and get some sort of input that way. But back in at the time when behaviorism was sort of gaining prominence, we didn't have a lot of those technologies, and they were like, okay, we're not going to trust, but basically we're just going to be very empirical about this, right? Just if you can't see it, it doesn't count, it doesn't exist. We're not going to worry about it. So hopefully I haven't beaten that dead horse too much. And when you're going through, so we'll talk a little bit about like Pavlov and Skinner and where it came from. And we're also going to talk about this model that's really central to all behaviorist approaches, which is this sort of ABC, antecedent behavior consequence model, that you have when you've pinpointed a behavior, like stealing or something that you want someone to stop, or another behavior, doing homework or something that you want someone to do more. Then you look into what the sort of the antecedents are, what came before it. You look into what the consequences are, what's coming after it, and you use those as a way to understand why the person is doing what they're doing, not from like these are the thoughts that they're having, but more like this is the sequence of events that happens. First they're hungry, and second they like see the food in the window, and then third they steal it, right, or something. That's maybe a terrible example, but at least being hungry in that case would be an antecedent, right? So we'll get into that model a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about conditioning and counter-conditioning, which is when you're being very deliberate about which things can cause a behavior, if I can use the word cause there. And a lot of that will deal with punishment and with reinforcement, trying to make a behavior happen more or trying to make it happen less. There's very specific. Most of the world runs on behaviorist principles, right? You want someone to do a job, you pay them money. They if you don't want them to do something, then you punish them when they do it, right? That's how behaviorism works, right? You don't care about why they're doing it. You just focus on the behavior and on rewarding it or punishing it. So it can seem a little cold in some ways, but it's very effective for certain scenarios. Especially when you're working with clients who can't maybe engage in a lot of the really philosophical stuff as easily. Like young children, for instance, behaviorism is fantastic, right? Like the sort of applied behavior analysis, that we'll get into in a little bit, is great. Or if you're working with, especially like autistic children, children with autism, the applied behavior analysis is pretty much the best treatment. And they'll talk. The unit will go over that a little bit. That you sort of go through their behavior and you figure out, what are sort of triggering points for them, and what they can do to change their behavior so that they are able to interact more successfully with the world and with people around them, and that sort of thing. Have a happier life. And we'll talk a little bit about behavioral activation, a little bit about goal setting, which I know that's kind of annoying, but it is sort of part of the behaviorism is very results focused. Did they do this behavior or not focused? And some of you might really like that. You like the hard-nosed empirical, there's nothing pseudo-scientific about this. It's just absolutely measurable. Has its limitations and stuff, but yeah. So hopefully that rambling overview is helpful in some way. The way that this unit is structured, briefly, is it starts with some of the history. It goes through some of the theory of the ABC model and counter conditioning. It talks a little bit about ABA. It talks about behavior analysis. Moves on to the goals, and then there's a quiz at the end. Usually there's a unit, sort of like a chunk of information, and there's a quiz afterwards. So the idea is that it will help you, that you can take the quiz, and I think that there's at least, we'll see if this ends up being in the final model, but some things that you can click and get an extra credit point, to sort of show that if you reinforce something with points, then someone might do it. Maybe that's mildly manipulative, hopefully not. But this is a pretty straightforward course. Yeah, hopefully you enjoy it, and let us know if you have any feedback or questions.